Cold War, Part 4. So I left you in Europe with the question, what about Asia? Does containment count in Asia? What's going on over there? Well, let's start with China. Okay? Start with Japan. I told you, one reason for the outline is in case I forget something. All right. Unlike Germany, Japan was not split into occupation zones because the Soviets only came into war like 2 days before the end. Okay? So we don't end up with this situation in Japan where there's a Soviet sphere of influence and an American sphere of influence. The Americans are occupying Japan. Because of this, the Japanese don't suffer from, they're not caught up in this Cold War atmosphere with like their country ripped apart into two separate parts. The American soldiers are there. We have the Japanese. They're fanatical in some ways during the war, but they're also used to following authority, and now there's a new authority in town. And one thing we did do is we kept the emperor there as a figurehead. Now, there was some people who thought they should try the emperor for war crimes. Then other people are saying, well, the military was really the responsibility of a lot of this. The dog is barking. I will pause this. Let's try this again. So, we don't remove the emperor from power because if he's willing to cooperate with us, that can help keep the Japanese population in line. Okay? And so the occupation of Japan goes fairly smoothly. Okay? But what will be a problem in Asia is the loss, some quotes, the loss of China. Well, we can't really lose China. It was never ours. But what we mean is the loss of China to the communists. So we'll go back prior to World War II for a minute. Okay? Right, I told you back at the time of the Boxer Rebellion that China didn't really have a strong central government. Prior to World War II and the Japanese invading China, there was a civil war going on, a struggle for power. Okay? And the two big forces were the nationalists under this guy, Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists under the control of Mao Zedong. All right? Now, there has been, I told you about this with like Peking and Beijing. There's been like changes in the translation protocols of Chinese names. And if you see this guy in the book, it's spelled different. I think it's still Mao, M-A-O, but it's like Z-E-Z Dung, D-U-N-G, something like that. The same guy. He's the head of the communists in China. All right. Now, when the Japanese invaded China, the two warring factions supposedly put aside most of their differences to concentrate on fighting the Japanese threat. Okay, the Americans were backing Chiang Kai-shek because he was the closest thing the Chinese had to an organized government that we could send supplies to, and he wasn't communist. Okay. So supposedly the two sides put their differences aside, and but I have heard that the nationalists did most of the fighting. The communists might have occasionally. I'm not saying the communists never fought the Japanese, but apparently they spent a lot of time kind of laying in wait, waiting for the Japanese to whittle the nationalists down to size, which would not surprise me. There's a book about this that I haven't read. I know who wrote it. Okay. He teaches at UNT. But anyway, that be as it may. When the Japanese are evicted out of China after the end of World War II, the Civil War kind of gets back up and running again. All right? And slowly but surely the communists take over China. Okay? We're trying to back Chiang Kai-shek as much as we can, but eventually the communists take over. There's a map here. I don't know if this animation will translate into the video that we're making. It may. See how the communists slowly gobble up all of China. Now, China is a big place, and it's got a lot of people living there. So this is a major advance from the communists, right? The communist cause. Now, something else to keep in mind is Russia's right up here. Okay. So the Soviet Union is probably supporting, they're supporting the communist forces in China. And for a little while, they're all very good friends. They're all a part of a great international communist conspiracy. Okay, they'll eventually have a falling out, but for a while, the Soviet Union and the Chinese are like, great, we're brothers in international communism. Okay? Now, people's reactions in the U.S. I got to get off this slide because this animation is going to drive us all crazy. Nationalist Chinese soldiers losing the communists. Here's the map I wanted. Okay. Chiang Kai-shek's forces, what's left of them, managed to escape to the large island. It was known as Formosa. In World War II, I referred to Formosa that the American Navy wanted to seize. Chiang Kai-shek's troops managed to maintain control of Formosa, and they form a Chinese government, and it's known as Taiwan. Okay, this is one of the potential flashpoints in the world today. The Communist Chinese control the Chinese mainland. Okay? The other Chinese, as a much smaller country, much less people, control Taiwan. They're all ethnically Chinese. They speak Chinese. They have Chinese heritage. But the Red Chinese, the Communist Chinese, very much look at Taiwan as a breakaway province that's under, like it's revolted, okay? Because who wouldn't want to be part of Communist China? Right? And the Communist Chinese are continuously, putting kind of pressure on Taiwan, and there are always kind of, hints, that they could, come over someday and try to invade and gobble it up. So of course the U.S. is determined not to let this happen, and this is a potential flashpoint that could lead to, say, a major war of China at some point. But now we're talking about the here and now. Let's go back to the 1940s. People's reactions to this. Okay? People in the U.S., actions in the U.S., are kind of down on Harry Truman. This happens on his watch. Okay. Now, honestly, I don't think there's much that Harry Truman could have done to stop China from going communist. I mean, we're going to send troops over there. Okay. But this is just how the game works. If your party's in power when something bad happens, the other party's going to blame you for it. So Truman's like, oh yeah, you were asleep on the job, Harry. You let the commies take over China. But I honestly don't know what he could have done to stop it. Okay? But where we will have trouble is right next door to China in a little place called Korea. Slide. Oh, there's a map of China. But this will work for our purposes for a minute. Here is Korea. You'll see that Korea is a peninsula attached to China. So China's right next door. And China's had a lot of cultural influence on the Koreans over the centuries. But the Korean people they have like their own distinct language and culture. So they're not Chinese, but they live next door, and they've obviously probably picked up some influences from China. All right, and we're going to have some problems in Korea. Now, at the end of World War II, the Soviets had gone into combat against Japanese forces operating in China. And so when the Japanese surrender, and everyone has to go in and disarm the troops and arrange to ship them home and everything, the Soviets do end up going into Korea. Okay, so the Soviets are in charge of the Korean Peninsula in the north, and the Americans are in charge in the south. The dividing line is the 38th parallel. Okay, so this is a situation very much similar to Germany. The country has been split into two halves. Now, there's not really a country of Korea per se, because the Japanese have been in Korea since, I think, 1910. So, there isn't like a functional Korean government that could just step up and take charge. So we'll have to help create a government in South Korea. So we'll help set up a government in South Korea. It's under the command of a guy named Singham. I can't speak Korean. R-A-G-E. They form what they call the Republic of Korea, usually abbreviated ROK, R-O-K, Republic of Korea. The Soviets, of course, set up a government in North Korea, and big surprise, it's a totalitarian, authoritarian, top-down power wielded by a dictator-type government with a communist bent. And the the leader of North Korea is Kim Il-sung, S-U-N-G, Kim Il-sung. And the country's called the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Remember, I told you, watch out for the word peoples. It usually suggests a communism where the people don't have a lot of say. Democratic, Mike, you know what? You get to go vote for a guy. Guess who's the only person on the ballot? Okay. So Mr. Kim is the grandfather of the current crazy Korean dictator. Okay. So if the country's formed like in the late 1940s, and the line of succession goes Mr. Kim, and then Mr. Kim's son, and then Mr. Kim's grandson, if the same family's been in charge of the place for like 70 years, I'm a little suspicious that it's really a Democratic People's Republic, but maybe I'm just being harsh. The current Mr. Kim, I think, did stand for election several years ago, where he got like 98% of the vote for some reason. All right. And so now what we have is two opposing Korean governments, one in the south that the U.S. is trying to set up along more diplomatic lines. No, I'm sorry, not diplomatic, democratic. It's a work in progress because the Koreans haven't had to run their own country for a few decades, and it takes time to set these things up. But we definitely know that we're no fans of what's going on in the north. Okay, and the dividing line here is the 38th parallel. Okay. Now, I can't cram in what's left in the limited amount of time I have, so rather than stop in the middle of what's about to happen, I'm going to stop here a little bit early. We'll pick back up and tell you what happens next, and that way it can all be contained, hopefully, within one video.